Welcome to another episode with your host, Robert E. Hansen, psychic medium, author, and public speaker.
Letting go or holding on. These are the two weights of the human condition. Should I let something go? What should I hold on to? Let's get into it. For most people, their world is built upon the memories of what was. And they reflect back on time, they look at different events, they look at old photographs, videos, family photographs, they talk with family members, and we're referring to as memory. I mean, memory is one of the great assets of the human condition. It lets us reflect back, it lets us think about things that have occurred, things we can correct, things we've chosen to leave the same. Memory is a very, very powerful tool. It lets us drive our car home. It tells us to buy milk for the family. We remember to plan vacations. It's a very, very powerful tool. Most organisms, most animals in the universe, in the wild, really have very, very limited, if at all, memory at all. There are certain animals that do have some sense of memory, which is built upon instinct combined with repetition. It becomes more of a conditioned response, a biological response, rather than being driven by thought itself. I mean, for example, there are cats, for example, that know exactly where they are, where they live, their home that they reside in, and they run into the woods, they run up into a tree, and the family's frantic that the cat's going to get lost. Does that happen occasionally? Sure. But in most cases, that animal knows exactly where it is. It knows exactly how to come home. It may not pay attention to the rules of your house, but that eventually that cat will be purring and making some sound outside your front door, or you'll find it laying on your porch. So the animal really is responding not so much by memory. It's more a matter of conditioning, scent, a variable internally, an instinctive compass that tells them where to go home, how to get home, and what to do. But for the human being, the evolutionary process of the brain has really amped up the human's experience. I mean, over 1 million years of evolution, 1 million years, that's a long time of evolution, we have been given this gift of memory. We have. It's a beautiful, beautiful asset. And if you close your eyes or just take a quick breath, you can just kind of float back in time, and perhaps you remember when your kids were born, or when you first got married, or you first fell in love, your first job. And on the flip side, for a lot of people, they remember their first heartbreak, or they remember the first major dealing with death itself. Perhaps a parent, perhaps a sibling has crossed over, and it burns a memory into one's soul. It just does. But when we really take a look at memory, its purpose is more function than practical, in the sense of, when we think about the past, I mean, certainly it does resurrect emotions, it resurrects reactions, it resurrects sensitivities, and all of that is great stuff. And of course, folks, for other people, they think about the past and they remember the struggles and the pain and the challenges. It can really drive them into a very, very painful place. So memory really has this two-sided coin to it on an emotional level. Now, if you have to remember to stop at a red traffic light, or if you have to remember to get milk for dinner, or if you have to remember to prepare your work schedule, it really doesn't activate the emotional system. I mean, it may trigger some little minor reflex internally. Oh, the traffic light, what a pain in the neck. I mean, it may generate something. But fundamentally, it's not an emotional memory we're dealing with here. This is more of a practical memory, like I talked about a moment ago. But when we are dealing with the deep memory of the past in terms of personalized experiences, as I just shared, that memory can generate great beauty, great love, big smiles, happy tears, laughter, hand slapping, knee slapping, flipping through note pages, looking at photo albums. It is awesome. And myself included, of course, we all have this sense of memory. We all do it. We've all been through it, and we continue to do it. It's just part of the human dynamic. So that part of memory, I'm not questioning or judging in any way, telling you to dissipate it. However, if you step back for a moment, if you step back just for a moment, just let's say a mild separation from it, and if you watch yourself, if you can watch yourself, look at yourself, remembering, you will realize very rapidly that you are no longer paying attention to the present moment, which you are unfolding in and your life is being lived in, but you are really putting that experience to the side, almost sticking the present moment on a shelf, instead going back into the memory of what was. Now, this part's a little sensitive here that I want to get into for a minute. You know, in my work, I deal with so many people that are enduring loss due to physical death. They also have lost in the sense that their child or their spouse or their sibling, somebody has disappeared from them. They've just picked up, they moved across country, moved out of the country completely to another place to live, and they basically are gone to them. Whatever drove that within them to leave and never say goodbye, or say goodbye one last time and say, I'm never going to speak to you again. You're out of my life now. And that can drive a very, very painful wound into somebody, right? So for those people, the memory of the relationship that used to be, even though they know the person is still in the world physically, they no longer have that relationship. It's true with people that get married and get divorced, and they really remain deeply in love with their partner, and the partner has moved on to somebody else or moved into another element of thinking away from the marital idea, and it leaves the one married person completely devastated, and all they do is live in memory. And the memory is not only one of love and affection, but it's also heartbreaking and full of tears. And because the memory is so painful, some people vow, I'll never get married again, I'll never fall in love again. It can really spin out of control. And what occurred, maybe let's make up a time 5 years before when you were just breaking up, here it is 5 years later, and you still can't shake the past. And every relationship you get embarked on, there's always this undertone, well, this is going to end too, this is going to fail too, it's not going to work out for me. And that whole mental attitude is driven by the memory of what was, right? So there's a sense of projecting the past into the present. And this is one of the problems of holding on to memory too long. It really, really creates a problem. And again, I want to underline this for you guys. Holding on to memory is nothing wrong with it. It's what the memories do to you in your reactions in the present tense where it becomes a problem. The memories of the past become almost like a measuring stick. I remember my childhood, how happy it was, and now as an adult, I'm not happy, and I live in the past memories to avoid the realities of where I'm living right now. Memory can become a very clever magician, pulling the curtains on the present moment and allowing you just to flip into the past over and over again, rebuilding and reinventing the past. And by the way, I want to make a comment about this too. There are people that I've worked with over the years, they do what I refer to anyway as romanticizing the past. They make the horrors of the past not so bad. They make the pleasantries of the past really horrible sometimes. They give it a romantic twist, like a dark novel, a romantically dark novel, and they turn a really good relationship, because it didn't work out, they turn that really good relationship into a big negative because they're angry about the fact that it didn't continue. Perhaps the guy fell out of love with you, perhaps the woman walked away from you, perhaps your son and daughter don't want to talk to you anymore. And what happens is, rather than just allowing the memory to be the way it was, happy times, good times, right? I guess sprinkled with trouble in there too. But, people will turn around and say, well, he was really a bitch or she was really a bitch. And, I really didn't really like them the way I did. And the defense mechanisms creep in. And the next thing you know, you're rationalizing and explaining away the past, which normally you loved. And the opposite is also true, too, in memory. I've met this with teenagers and young adults especially, where they've had kind of a rough patch with their parents. Sometimes parents can be very abusive, cruel at times, physically cruel, emotionally cruel, distant, cold, unaffectionate, injurious type of personalities, a quick slap, a hair pull, a push, a shove, you name it. I've dealt with some young people like this, even adults as well, in rough marital environments where the husband or the wife is very physically abusive, really condescending, cruel in tongue, and they break off or something occurs. And you talk to them about the past and they go, oh, he wasn't that bad. She wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as I think it was. And what they really do is they really have kind of a form of PTSD. They have almost a post-traumatic experience, right? Like a syndrome of post-traumatic depression. And to alleviate the fact that they were raised in a hell house, or the fact that they were raised in a very, very dysfunctional, violent, unforgiving environment, the mind is seeking some way to make sense of it all, and it creates a sense of comfort of the past, or at least I remember that one day that my father smiled at me, or I remember the one day that my husband didn't hit me. And that becomes their moniker. They begin to alter their approach to the past, suppressing and repressing the truth of what happened, which really has driven the scars and the wounds on their soul. But rather than addressing it, they will shift into an altered state of reality, and they create a different type of a memory. So for them, forgetting the past, letting go of the past, becomes not only a burden, but it becomes an altered burden. They don't really want to let go of the past as it was, or see the past in a memory way as it really was, to see the truth of it, but instead they will shift the dynamics. And what happens to these guys a lot is on the subconscious level, the level deeper than their thinking, it drives them almost like a black balloon that blows up out of the underneath the ocean and eventually breaks to the surface of their thinking. They suddenly find themselves propelled back in almost exactly the same behavior that they themselves left as a child. They then continue this behavior because they really never dealt with it. They never really looked at the past intimately and clearly and deeply. Now, I'm not talking about psychoanalysis. I'm not asking to go back and re-examine stuff. And for some people, that may be a very helpful tool. By all means, I'm not suggesting you should not. What I'm simply saying is the past unfolded as it unfolded, right? So when someone talks about forgetting the past, it suggests or it implies that we erase it away, don't discuss it, don't look at the photographs, don't do anything. Just forget about it. Just forget about it. And that's a tall order for a lot of people. They find it very difficult to do that. They look at the present moment and they say, okay, this is my present moment, but I have 50 years of a past history. I want to live there. And they don't really sense what is occurring. When the mind creates this memory system, right? We talked about this a little bit back. The mind is creating a memory. It's part of the evolutionary process of the human organism. It's an extremely powerful tool. And that can hold us prisoner in the past. It's not just serving as a guide. It can serve as a warden, as a judge and jury over your soul, and it keeps you driven into the past. And when you live in the past, I mean really, like most people I do, they live in the past when they meet somebody. when they buy a house, when they go to a restaurant, when they drive down the street, there is always this reference, this comparison between the way they remember it and the way it is now. The way they remember it and the way it is now. So when they see the moment as it approaches on a spiritual practice, when you see the moment arising right in front of your face, it's right here, you don't see it. What you see is an image of it, yes. You think you're looking at it, that's true. You say, oh, there's the house, there's the dog, there's the car, there's my kids waving at me, there's my wife coming up the driveway with shopping bags. Here it is, right? And you say, okay, I see it. What are you talking about? You're not seeing it completely. What you're seeing is, yes, on the obvious level, you see it, but you're also seeing it subconsciously, whether you realize it or not, through the screen and the filter of the way it was. Yeah? So you're comparing the past memory to the present experience. And when you do that, you can never really hold on to the experience as it is being expressed in the very, very moment. When you see the experience in the very moment, there is no memory. Now let's do that again. When you really see the present moment in its pure form, memory is not involved. It is the beauty and the awe, the expression of the present moment. But, as we just spoke about, many people don't do that. And 99.9% of people do not do that. There's always this juncture between what was and what is occurring. What was and what is occurring. Memory versus presence. So if you're in this practice, if you're learning to really ease your anxieties, de-stress yourself, free yourself from the bondage of fear and anxiety, the only place you can really live is in the present moment. And when you're in the present moment, and please don't take this the wrong way, there is no memory. Now you might say, what are you talking about? My son died, and you want me to forget my son? Of course not. No one is even hinting that you should not have memories and photographs and images. No, but on a level, especially for a mom, right? The idea that her physical child is no longer physically present, it will drive her back into memory because the idea of it, the reality of it, is too brutal to accept. So she is forced. Her consciousness, her ego system, her whole being drives away from that reality and lives in the past. It does. And if she has other surviving children, other family members, as much as they may understand her reasons for doing it, they are not getting that person completely. They are getting a partial person because part of them is in the past. And no one is asking them at this juncture to change or to forget or suppress, right? But for the family, for the other people, they might say, come on, you got to be with us now, Mom. It's been 5 years. You got to lighten up a little bit, something like that. And that can draw anger, that can draw irritation, that can draw clenched fists. Don't you dare say that to me. I lost my son, and I don't want to hear about it from you or anyone else. You know, you guys are here. He's not, she's not. And it can really be a very understandable, very reasonable, very common thing. And for those people who do have to live like that, my heart goes out to you, and you're just not ready, and that's fine, to make this shift from before to now, from past to now. Please understand, no one is asking to forget the past. I want to keep emphasizing this in this cast because I'm not asking anyone to drop the past. It is the attachment to the past, the woven past into your very skin that will never let you fully live a complete life. You cannot live your life in the past. If you have someone that has crossed over, honor them in the present moment, because that is where their soul is. That is where they inhabit. The present moment, the daily bread, is where the souls live. The souls live in the sacred moment. So if you want to be close to your child that has crossed over, pay attention to the present moment. If you want to think about the way it was from time to time, by all means do that. But come back to the present moment. Come back to the present sense. Come back to the present awareness. This is very, very, very important. Not only to help you heal, and when I mean heal, you can learn to live fully with the wound of grief. You can learn to live fully with the wounds of sorrow. You can. If you think people are walking around completely free of all sorrow and all grief, you're sadly mistaken. Even great spiritual teachers suffer from grief and sorrow. As a human animal, they do. They do. But they also, on a spiritual level, release it immediately. They don't free it like they're throwing it away. They just allow it to move through them, very much like clouds move through the sky. They're there, they're powerful, they're dark and foreboding, but eventually they break apart and sunlight re-enters. That is the great secret. That is part of the great teaching. So we recognize the clouds are moving through the sky. We recognize the thunderstorms that move through our mind. We recognize the events that have traveled through our soul since the time we were born. And not one single event is occurring other than what's happening in the present moment. All else lies in the memory of what you choose to forget or not forget about the past. I want to share a story with you now that kind of amplified this to you guys, because this teaching is extremely important if you want to heal and find some peace in your days going forward. Okay? In the Buddhist tradition, I have spent time in the Buddhist community. I have spent time in Japan. I have spent time in Zen monasteries on the East Coast and the West Coast. I have spent a better part of my adult life in meditative practice and prayer. It is just a calling that one gets. It's not something you make happen. It's just, you're drawn to it. In the same way you're drawn to the ocean, or you're drawn to the forest, or you're drawn to babysit children. It's just a good feeling and you go for it, right? So this has happened to me since I'm a young teenager, and I still embrace it on a daily basis. But this story comes out of the Buddhist people, and in this story, there's a little legend that occurred about two guys. One's name was Tanzen, and the other's name was Aikido. Right? Tanzen was a Zen master. He was a spiritual being. He had deep resonance on a spiritual level. He was very present, very deep in his studies, very clear, very focused. Aikido was a young novice monk coming up in the ranks, coming up in his studies. He had been an attendant for many, many years under Tanzen. And one day they are walking down along a riverbank. Now, in the Buddhist culture, especially in the very strict Buddhist communities, any interaction with a female, almost on any level, is strictly forbidden. Even if you see them walking down the street, you kind of avert your eyes and you keep on going. You only interact with them on the most minimal levels. And the idea, of course, behind this is not to be distracted by any sexual energy, not to be swayed off the path of practice, and to stay on task. And one of the things that's really, really big in this is under no conditions, and I mean under no conditions, are you allowed to touch a female. Under no conditions. That's just forbidden. It's one of the great heresies in the practice. They don't allow for it for any reason at all. So here they are. These two guys are walking along a riverside. It's a beautiful river. It's a bright day. And they notice down the stream that there is a woman washing her clothes in the stream. At that time, there was no laundromats, there's no laundries, there's no washing machines. All cleaning of clothing was scrubbed by hand, some form of soap. You crash it off the rocks, you scrape and scrape and scrape. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. It's not just culturally in Japan or in China or in the Eastern cultures. It's pretty much worldwide that at some point in times, if you want to get your clothes cleaned up, you find a river nearby, and here you go scrub away and get yourself some clean laundry. Then you hang it over a tree branch and let it dry in the sun. That's pretty much the standard, right? So these two guys are walking, and they notice this young woman is washing her clothes. And as she goes to stand up, she loses her footing, falls into the river, and begins to drown. Very serious situation, right? Life is at risk. So Hansen, the head guy, runs ahead, steps into the water, grabs her by the arm, pulls her head up out of the water, drags her to the shoreline, kneels down next to her, helps her catch her breath, and makes sure that she's okay. He notices that she's recovered. She's spitting up water, saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He bows politely. He gets up and starts walking down the rest of the riverbank. Well, Aikido, the guy behind him, the monk, is watching this. And being a young novice, he starts to create inner turmoil within himself. He starts to judge what he just saw. And he starts to get really irritated. And he says, what the hell's going on here? We were told never to touch a woman for any reasons. It's like absolute written in stone. You don't touch them. You let them just do whatever they do, but you don't go and touch a female. And here is the headmaster, my guy, doing it. What the heck's going on? Anyway, he doesn't say anything, and they continue to walk for an hour or two. And finally, the internal combustion of young Aikido is really growing, and you can feel this almost hostility floating in the air around him. He's really irritated now. It's built up. He keeps reflecting on what occurred. And Hansen, being very settled, very controlled, very, very aware, eventually turns around and says, "Young monk, what seems to be your problem? I can feel this hostility. I can feel this negative energy. Why are you like this? What's up with you?" And the young monk says, "Master, Hansen, how is it you put your hands on that woman after everything we have been taught? How is it you've touched her?" And the master looks at the young monk Aikido and says, "Young monk, I put that woman down hours ago. You are the one that is still carrying her." And the young monk woke up, and he saw internally, not just an idea in his head, he saw internally exactly what his master was pointing to. He knew that what is occurring in the past had to happen in that moment as it was needed to save a life, which supersedes everything. Every rule is broken to save a life, to save a form, to save life. All rules go out the window when a life is involved. But he also knew his master was pointing to something that already occurred, already was completed, and was finished. And he saw that he was attaching to his thoughts in a judgmental way with an attitude to hold on to something, to feed his ego, to find that he wanted to find a flaw with his teacher. This was a great opportunity, and he felt he was righteous in his judgment, and his judgment was completely misplaced. Young Aikido bowed to this master, Hansen, and stayed with him for another 10 years at his side. And one day he too completely awokened and then moved along in his life. This is the great teaching There is nothing wrong with memory on a practical level. I've said it 10 times in this chat. I want you to hear it again. There is nothing wrong with memory on a practical level. We need it. But when you attach to it, when it holds you prisoner, when it will not let you walk freely in your own skin for hours, still thinking about what happened, and you're missing the moment of what is occurring, it is called suffering. In the Christian culture, it was referred to as living in hell. Not living in the daily bread, but living in the hell of the past. So I wanted to share this really cool story with you about forgetting, about holding on. And by the way, when we talk about holding on, what can you hold on to? I mean, there's this idea you can hold on to your home, you can hold on to your bank account, you can hold on to your automobiles, you can hold on to your children's hands, you can hold on to your clothing, you can hold on to your status, you can hold on to your memory. And you know what happens? The moment death shows up, the moment death arrives, every bit of that is over. And you realize after your physical death, your soul will look and say, you know, there was nothing I can hold on to except love. Love is the only thing that still radiates in me. All my physical properties, all the people in my world, all the physical elements in my world have disappeared because of my death, the emptying of all thought. What remains is my sacred consciousness, and that is love, you see. So there's nothing, my friends, you can hold on to. You think you can, and on the short term, you probably feel you have some power of that. And with that, that's fine. But understand it's short-lived, shortly experienced, offers nothing in the end of days. What is most important is to come to see the present moment, this sacred moment. And when you see that, you will then have received the gift of understanding the purpose of memory, the purpose of forgetting, the purpose of forgiving. You will see the whole beauty of this experience. That story is really powerful, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this little chat. It is one of my favorite topics to share with my friends. It applies to my life. I teach it to my kids. I teach it to everybody. It is something that only time and experience can give to you. Just give it a thought. I think you might find it extremely helpful when you are struggling with the dark twists and turns of holding on to the past. There's a great freedom available to you. I wish you peace, and I hope you find it. I really do. It's a beautiful way to live your lives. Hey, thanks for listening, you guys.